Alright guys, welcome to today's video. Today we're focusing on the Unit 4 study guide. We're just going to focus on the parallel lines and transversals. Hopefully you have the sheet in front of you so you can take notes and check your answers as you go through. Now the first slide is probably the most important slide because for this unit, if you don't know the vocab, you're not going to be able to do the rest of the unit. So we need to make sure we know our vocab. Now we want to identify at least one pair, and there are more than one pair, of each angle type given that A and B are parallel and given that M and N are parallel. Now, for this, there's going to be about 8 typically types for each because we have 2 sets of parallel lines. If we look at alternate interior, alternate means opposite sides of the transversal, interior is inside. So if I look at line N as my transversal with A and B parallel, those are my interior angles. So for alternate interior, I can have 2 and 12, or I can have 3 and 9. Also for lines A and B being parallel, but on transversal M, those are my interior angles. They're inside lines A and B. So for those, I would have 6 and 16, or 7 and 13. Now, we also, if you looked and used lines M and N, you could have those as your interior angles. Well, that tells me 3 and 5 would be alternate interior, and 4 and 6 would be alternate interior. I could also use B as my transversal, making 12 and 14 alternate interior, and 11 and 13 alternate interior. So it just depends what transversal and what set of parallel lines you used. Now, when it comes to alternate exterior, again, that alternate is still opposite, but exterior is the outside. Well, if I use A as my transversal for M and N, those are my exterior angles. So alternate exterior gives me 1 and 7, or 2 and 8. If I use B as my transversal, I have 9 and 10 and 15 and 16. Those are my exterior angles. So 9 and 15 are alternate exterior, and 10 and 16 are alternate exterior. We can also use lines A and B, which makes 4 and 1, 10 and 11 my exterior. That means 1 and 11 are alternate exterior, and 4 and 10 are alternate exterior. If I use M as my transversal, 5 and 15 are alternate exterior, and 8 and 14 are alternate exterior. Make sure you're careful with these. You need to make sure that you're going opposite, not just exterior, not just the other parallel line. Make sure you're going the opposite side of the transversal. Now, corresponding just means they're in the same spot. So 1 corresponds to 9 on line N. On line A, 1 corresponds to 5. 2 corresponds to 10. 2 also corresponds to 6. 4 corresponds to 12, and 4 also corresponds to 8. 3 would go to 11, and 3 would also go to 7. Now, if you notice, my top box of 4 angles does not reach the other side. They are not corresponding angles. They are not falling on either of the same transversals or either of the same sets of parallel lines. So you need to keep that in mind. Now, 15 is corresponding to 11, and it is corresponding to 7. If I look at 16, it is corresponding to 12 and corresponding to 8, but it's still not corresponding to 4. 14 corresponds to yellow, which is 10, and it corresponds to 6. And 13 corresponds to 9 and 5. But again, if you notice, none of those stars are located in the opposite corner. They cannot correspond across that. As far as vertical angles, it is across a vertex. So we have a lot of pairs for vertical. You can have 1 and 3. You can have 2 and 4. 5 and 7. 6 and 8. 13, 15. 16, 14. 9 and 11. And 10 and 12. They cannot go across multiple parallel lines. It is just across a single vertex. Now, linear pairs, we have a lot. So I'm not going to list them all. But the thing you need to keep in mind with linear pair, it is a line. So I can have 14 and 15. It can be crossing that line. I could have 15 and 16. They could both be exterior angles. It is like that for any sets of the angles. Anytime you have two angles next to each other along a straight line, that is your linear pair. Now, for consecutive interior, they are next to each other on the inside of the parallel lines. So if I focus on my transversal of B, my consecutive interior are 12 and 13 and 14 and 11. Because if these are my parallel lines and my transversal, they are inside the parallel lines and on the same side as the transversal. You could also have 3 and 6 and 4 and 5 for M and N. If we look at A and B, you would have 6 and 13, 7 and 16. You could have 3 and 12, or you could have 2 and 9. Now, the difference between consecutive interior and consecutive exterior is just inside versus outside. The pairs circled in red are your consecutive interior. If I take those two, those are consecutive exterior. Those are consecutive exterior. They have to be outside the parallel lines, but on the same side as the transversal. Now, no relationship goes back to the vertical angles that we were talking about, or the corresponding angles, when they are not on the same transversal and not on the same set of parallel lines. Now, the important thing to also keep in mind with all of this, alternate exterior, alternate interior, corresponding and vertical, they are all congruent. They will always equal each other. Linear pair, consecutive interior and consecutive exterior, will always be supplementary, or they will add up to equal 180. And that holds true as long as you have parallel lines. Now, we want 4 angles supplementary to angle 5. Well, first I need to figure out what's congruent to angle 5, and then we can go from there. If I look at 5, 5 is congruent to 8 because they are vertical. 5 is congruent to 4 because they're alternate interior. And 5 is congruent to 1 because they're corresponding. I have no other congruent angles, so that means everything that is left there is supplementary to 5 because those angles are all congruent to each other. So if they're all congruent to each other, then they have to be supplementary to it. So my answers would be angle 2, angle 3, angle 6, and angle 7. All 4 of them would be supplementary. Even though 6 and 7 make a linear pair with 5, 3 and 5 are consecutive interior, 2 and 5 don't have a relationship. However, if I put 5 where 4 is, now they're a linear pair. So make sure you're finding all the congruent angles. Anything that is not congruent is now supplementary. Which sets of lines are parallel and by what relationship? Now, the big thing here you have to keep in mind. You need to find the relationship and know what type it is. If I have alternate interior, alternate exterior, or corresponding, they need to be congruent. If I have consecutive interior or consecutive exterior, they need to be supplementary or equal 180. You can have consecutive interior angles that don't add up to 180, and we do. These two angles right here are consecutive interior, but they don't add up to 180, so it does not prove that they are parallel. Now, if we look, well, that erased some of my lines. If we look, I have a consecutive interior pair here. They equal 180. So I need to look, they both fall on angle, or on transversal Y. That tells me these two are my parallel lines. So C is parallel to B by consecutive interior. If I also look on this side, I have a pair of alternate interior angles. They both fall on transversal A, so that tells me these are my two lines. So Y is parallel to Z by my alternate interior. And alternate interior is congruent? They are congruent. Now, one thing to be mindful of. These two right here form a linear pair, but a linear pair does not prove that they are parallel. So don't try and prove it parallel using a linear pair or using vertical. We will never use those to prove anything parallel. Given AB is parallel to CD, find the value of X and Y. Well, if AB and CD are parallel, that means BC is my transversal. Well, now we can use some of the angles that we have. The side lengths don't matter. We don't need any of those, so we're just going to cross them off. Now, I have that angle 122. Use angle types you know. I know 122 equals Y because they are alternate interior angles. They are inside the parallel lines and opposite sides. I know 122 plus X is going to equal 180 because they are consecutive interior. I also know X plus Y is going to equal 180 because they are a linear pair. So we know what Y is. I can't use X plus Y to solve 180 unless I plug 122 in. So I'm going to use 122 plus X equals 180. That tells me X is going to equal 58 degrees. Anytime it tells you angles are lines are parallel, make sure you use your angle types. It may not look perfect. Extend the lines or draw just half of the figure so you can see what types of angles you have. If A is parallel to B, the measure of angle 6 is 5x plus 3, and the measure of angle 11 Now, as I read that at measure of angle 11, 9x minus 33, I do apologize, there is a typo. This should not say angle 11, this should say angle 7. Angle 6 and angle 11 don't have a relationship because we don't know that S and T are parallel. Now, if I look at 6 and 7, they're consecutive interior. So I'm going to take 5x plus 3 plus 9x minus 33 equals 180. You're going to use the algebra to solve it. So 14x minus 30 equals 180. X is going to equal 15. Now, the big thing you need to keep in mind here, it does not say find X. We want to find angle 7. So I need to take this 15 and go back up to my original problem. So 9 times 15 minus 33. We are just plugging in what we got. Angle 7 should equal 102 degrees. But make sure you read the problem carefully because it doesn't say solve for X. It says solve for angle 7. Last one, given the figures, is A parallel to B? Well, if I look at that picture, I do see two congruent angles, and I do see that they're vertical angles, and we do know vertical angles are congruent. However, vertical angles do not prove anything parallel. They are only falling on two lines. There's not a third line that crosses. There's not a second parallel line. So automatically, A and B are gone. Vertical does not prove parallel. So I'm going to look. No, because there are not supplementary angles that form a linear pair. Well, the key word here is linear pair and supplementary. Supplementary angles or linear pairs are supplementary. But again, linear pair is like vertical. We cannot use that to prove parallel. D, no, because there are no congruent corresponding alternate interior or alternate exterior angles. We need to know, are corresponding alternate interior or alternate exterior angles congruent? They are. So your correct answer here is D. Even though they're congruent and vertical angles are congruent, it does not prove anything parallel. Hopefully this has answered some of your questions and you're ready to take your retake.